What is your name, what are your pronouns, and what are you going to talk about today?
My name is Charlie, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm going to be talking about ADHD.
Could you give us an ADHD 101?
ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects things like attention, concentration, impulsivity, hyperactivity, all that kind of stuff. One really quick thing to say is that ADD isn't a thing anymore. It was removed from the DSM. You just have ADHD. You can have inattentive type, hyperactive type, or combined type.
Could you please give us a brief description of how having ADHD has affected you personally?
So I find it really difficult. I can't control what I pay attention to, basically. So if I find something interesting, I can do it all day. If I find it easy and satisfying and gives my brain those little dopamine hits, I'm quite happy to do that, and people would never think, oh, you have ADHD because you're concentrating on that thing. But it's really inconvenient that I can't focus that myself. I can't choose it. So a lot of things I really struggle with. If I'm not interested in them, I physically can't do it. I really struggle with executive dysfunction, and people find it really hard to relate to. So the best kind of metaphor I've found for it is if someone told you, put your hand on a hot stove and you'll get £1 million. And you go, oh yeah, I really want that £1 million, I'm just going to do it. But you can't make your brain put your hand on the stove. That's what so many things are like for me. I'm like, and my brain wants to, I want to do it, I know that it would be good for me, but I can't make myself do it. And that's the biggest thing that people don't know about ADHD. Also, generally I really struggle with timekeeping. So I kind of have no internal sense of time. In terms of planning my day for how long, right, I need to get out the house by 10, so I need to do this and this. I can't I can't do it, and it sounds so strange, but I have no idea how long it takes me to do tasks. Everything like that is broken down into so many individual steps in my brain that I have to organise. And another thing about ADHD is I really struggle to organise and prioritise different things. So you can imagine that doesn't really add up well in terms of me functioning.
How did having ADHD affect you growing up?
Growing up, I didn't know I had ADHD. I only sort of discovered it after coming to uni. So I'm quite passionate about seeing labels and stuff, because for so long I just thought I was lazy, I was careless, I was unorganised and I couldn't do work, and that was it. And that's how you kind of get associated with when you don't understand that, no, actually there's something in your brain that makes you like this. So me, appearing female and not being especially hyperactive, they just assumed, well, that's it, you don't have it, and you just have sort of different difficulties. I remember in school I was constantly told that I wasn't doing enough work, wasn't trying hard enough, had so much potential, was so well behaved, but could never deliver. And it makes you feel really rubbish, because you're just always told, oh, you could be doing better. And it's well, yeah, I could, but I didn't have anything in place that would help me.
Have you felt you've been marginalised or stereotyped due to having ADHD?
Not so much me personally. It's not something that people sort of instantly recognise about a person, but definitely in the world there's been situations where, I sort of mentioned before, they assume that you're female, so you don't have ADHD. It's a boys thing. Again, with the hyperactive thing, you can have ADHD but not present hyperactive. But also, hyperactivity can look really different in different people. A lot of the times, especially the gender thing I talked about before, girls will talk a lot, talk excessively. And that's an expression of hyperactive behaviour, but it's not recognised because people just think girls like to gossip. Also in terms of fidgeting, just because I'm not up and running about, I'm always fidgeting with my hands, I'm always my toes are moving in my shoes, but it's just things that people don't notice because I've kind of socialised to fit in.
Has anything like this happened at the university, or have you felt quite accepted?
Generally, I felt quite accepted at the university, but I definitely feel there's areas of improvement. I sort of did my research, sort of went to the uni to try and get help with getting a diagnosis, and they were like, okay, but you're having difficulties with your work, do a dyslexia screening, do this screening. And I was like, that's not the difficulties I face. Also in that kind of process, there was a ADHD screener, and some of the questions on that screener, I actually technically didn't pass it. In terms of that, I then moved on to have an actual appointment with a psychologist, who said, yeah, you have this. But the initial screener, there was a lot of questions that were based on if I had accommodations in place for myself, that meant that they scored me lower in terms of, that meant I didn't have ADHD. But by this time I was like 19, you know, I've lived my life, I've put in place things, you know, to make my life work. I know what I need to do in order to exist, you know, I've got to university, obviously I'm sort of capable of living. Yeah, I do these things to make sure I'm, you know, respectful of other people's time, but it doesn't mean I don't struggle with them. Fortunately, the guy doing my assessment was really nice and did really listen to me and said, obviously you're having enough struggles in these certain areas that we will refer you, but I think that could have been really difficult for someone, especially because I was quite confident in advocating for myself in that, no, I've done enough research, I do know that this is me. If that was someone that was a lot less sure of themselves, I think they would have really struggled in that situation.
Could you do some myth busting about stereotypes surrounding ADHD?
So a lot of people think that ADHD may be just, oh, you're being naughty, you have too much energy, all these sorts of things, but it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. It impacts all of your brain. It's like the entirety of the way I think. Another thing is people think that people with ADHD are always late to things. That is, I mean, in some cases it's true, but it's not that people aren't trying. There's so many steps that you need to sort of complete and go through in your head before you can even leave the house. You know, I've kind of got my routine down to where I sort of know what to do, but I still really struggle with it. And there's days where, you know, one thing might happen to mean your whole routine is sort of gone out of the way. And dealing with that takes a lot longer than someone else because they just kind of think, oh, this one step's gone, so I'm able to just mitigate it. But to me, like, my whole routine's gone, so I have to organise a whole nother routine in my head. It's not that people aren't trying and they're not wasting your time. It's just difficult sometimes, but a lot of the time people with ADHD can be on time and can do quite well because they're thinking about it a lot more than everyone else. It's not just men that have it, and also it's not just children that have it. That's another really big one. Everyone can have it, and the vast majority of time it lasts throughout your life. Some people, it improves for them as they age, just because of like certain hormones and stuff, and some people a lot of the time as they get older are put on medication, so that kind of dampens a lot of the side effects, I guess. So you may not think it's as present, but it is a lifelong thing that people struggle with.
How could the people around you and the university do better?
So in terms of people around you, I'd say maybe just being a little bit forgiving. So when you're not confronted by a person or a situation, you kind of forget how you feel, if that makes sense. It really want to emphasize it doesn't mean that your friends don't care about you. Your friends absolutely do care about you, and if a friend with ADHD hasn't messaged you, don't think that they hate you or that something's wrong. Just maybe if that little bit of extra effort that you can put in to reach out to be like, hey, how's it going, means so much, because there's so many thoughts constantly going on in the head of someone with ADHD. They probably really do want to hang out with you, and they've thought about this and crafted an entire message and then got distracted and forgot to send it. In terms of the uni, I think they've been very good in terms of, you know, obviously the issues with the screener that I mentioned earlier, but beyond that, the support was really good. People did listen to me, they put me straight through to a psychologist, then really helped me with my DSA application, which was really helpful for me getting through uni. Put in place all things like extra time, which I really need. Sometimes I will say I've had an experience where a lecturer sort of followed the letter of the accommodations but not the intention. That meant that I didn't get the extra time that I needed, and that was a bit of a struggle because you sort of think, well, it should be obvious to you that you're skirting around the rules of how this is meant to work. You know, you should be thinking about the students in your class that have these accommodations and need them, and what you're putting in place for them doesn't work for them. So the people that are able to work in a kind of a more normal fashion just woke up early, spent the entire day doing it, submitted it, went to bed. Meanwhile, I was up till literally 6 a.m. in the library, desperately trying to finish to get this done because it just takes me longer. I go off on so many kind of tangents during my research. I kind of, really struggle with the executive dysfunction. Just getting that kind of motivation welled up to start things is really difficult. Yeah, so it's really important to just let people have the accommodations they need.
How do you feel the media represents ADHD?
I feel like it's really lacking generally. I understand that it's probably difficult to get explicit representation of ADHD just because it affects such like a wide variety of things. It's not a physical, visible disability, so it's not something you can sort of easily just slot in. but it's really lacking. I can't think of an example that I've seen of people with ADHD in kind of like, you know, movies and TV shows. And again, in terms of like just news articles, it's not really mentioned, it's really brushed over. Like, there's quite a lot on social media, especially TikTok, which is good in a sense because it means that a lot of people with ADHD are kind of realizing younger, because I know that for me it was, you know, just thinking that there was something wrong with me and that I was lazy and stupid, and you know, now people know and can put a label to it and go, oh yeah, that's me, that's why. And then when you know what's wrong with you, you know, you can sort of look at things that other people have done to help out and then put that in place for your own life, and it can, you know, give you some really helpful tips on how to deal with it. So it's really good in that sense. But it's a shame because there can be, you know, it's so unregulated in social media, you know, there can be so much information and so much misinformation about it that it's a shame that that's kind of the main way that it's represented, because it's kind of unreliable, you know, it's a bit of a shame. It would be nice to have more reliable information widely available about ADHD.
Is there anything else you would like to say, or anything you would like anyone else to know about ADHD?
Some people with kind of neurodivergencies view it as a superpower, something that helps them. For me, I have a much more complicated relationship with my ADHD. I wouldn't want to be without it because I've lived with it so much, and it is me, it's my way of thinking, it's so much a part of me, it's how I live. I wouldn't want to change it, but also I really recognise that I don't view it as a superpower. I view it as something that does disable me in a lot of ways and does make my life quite difficult. I don't necessarily view it as a positive overall, is kind of what I'm trying to say. There's a lot to it, some positive, some negative. I see things differently than other people because of the way I think, which can be really positive. I feel like I have a lot of empathy for other people because of, I know that there's a lot going on that people don't see and hear, so I can kind of apply that to other people. And I think those things are really good and really strong skills, but also there's a lot that would make my life easier if it wasn't the case.